Do you think you're smart enough to figure out if someone's lying? Turns out if you're too smart, that may work against you. Lying is a consistent element we see in narcissistic relationships, and it drives the betrayal and the lack of trust that festers in narcissistic relationships. So let's meet Abby Ellin and her experience of a bottomless pit of lies that she encountered with the pathological liar she almost married and who ended up going to jail. He lied about everything from the Brussels sprouts at dinner to having another fiance in another city. Abby is a journalist, the author of Duped, Double Lives, False Identities, and The Con Man I Almost Married, and host of the podcast Imposters, The Commander. Abby's experience in this relationship led her to do a deep dive into lying and deceit. Today we get to hear Abby's story as well as some of the truths she's heard about lying. We break down why people lie, explore the idea of self-deception, and the steps you can take to protect yourself in a world where trust is often in short supply. All survivors of narcissistic relationships know what it feels like to be lied to. Today, we're going to learn about the anatomy of a liar. This podcast should not be used as a substitute for medical or mental health advice. Individuals are advised to seek independent medical advice, counseling, and/or therapy from a healthcare professional with respect to any medical condition, mental health issue, or health inquiry, including matters discussed on this podcast. The views and opinions expressed are solely those of the podcast author or individuals participating in the podcast, and do not represent the opinions of Red Table Talk Productions, iHeartMedia, or their employees. Abby, welcome. It is so nice to finally meet you in person.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
You know, when I read your book, Duped, and I'm double fisting your book.
Paperback and hardcover. Right? Woohoo.
I thought I was going to read a memoir of lying, and I really got a master class on lying.
You got a master class? You're the master.
No. Thank you for that. But lying and deceit is a very specific area, and it's something that hurts people in so many ways. And so today on Navigating Narcissism, lying is very much a part of narcissism, but it goes way deeper than that. And so can you tell us your experience of being duped?
Yes, I can. The short version is that I was engaged to a man who was a pathological liar and went to jail. That's the short version. The longer version is that I am a journalist, and I was writing an article for the New York Times that I needed to quote a doctor. It had to do with detox diets, and I needed an expert. And I found this guy who worked at Cedars-Sinai, actually here in Los Angeles, and he was lovely and smart, and we had a conversation, and that was the end of it. And I quoted him. And then the story didn't run for about a year. So I fact-checked with him a year later, and he said, I'm not in L.A. anymore. I'm in Jacksonville at the Naval Hospital. And I said, okay. And he said, I joined the Navy. I rejoined the Navy as a Navy doc. I had been years ago. I said, okay. He said, I'm opening up a hospital for kids with cancer in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I said, fantastic. Keep me posted on that, because that's a story. And so he said, okay. And every so often he would write me these notes. They were very strange. They were just filled with medical jargon. I didn't understand them. That was the end of it. Until the end of whatever year it was, he started writing to me more. And it soon became clear that he had interest. So we met. And, you know, it moved quickly. At the time, I was 42. And he was 58. I thought he was ancient. Yeah, right? As I get older, that doesn't seem so old. But he would tell me stories that I couldn't verify. Like he told me he had met his ex-wife when he rescued her when she was held hostage in Iran. And I was like, when were we in Iran? Like the time didn't, 1970, that wouldn't have made any sense. He said or 79, sorry. And he said, yeah, it was a secret mission. You wouldn't have heard about it. And so then he told me that he was held hostage in China, and secret mission, you wouldn't have heard about it. And I I'm a journalist. I was like, what? This is insane. But he had a kid, and his kid, who was 12 at the time, seemed to know all of his father's stories. Like he knew him. And I thought to myself, well, if he's lying to his kid about that, that's like child abuse. Like if he's been, his kid thought one day, his kid looked out the window and said, oh, there's a black sedan outside. Is that one of your guys following us? Because he had told his kid that like the bad guys hated him so much that he had Secret Service following him to make sure that all of his people were okay. So his son knew this. And I would overhear these conversations. Yeah. So I thought, it's weird, but you know what? What do I know? I'm from the suburbs of Boston. This is not my beat. What do I know about that, the CIA? I mean, I don't know anything about this world. Because he told me he'd been in the CIA and all this stuff. I could not verify it.
Yeah.
But it drove me mad because I need to get answers. And I don't like not having information. And I remember friends of mine said, this is the lesson you're going to have to learn, that there's so much information and you can't know everything. And I was like, yeah, but that doesn't work for me. I got to know everything. I need to know how everything lines up. So I would ask him questions and he would yell at me. He would say, you interrogate me. You have to trust and you're mistrusting. And that's your problem. And that's why you have had bad relationships in the past. And so I really thought there was something wrong with me. Mm. And so he proposed within 6 months. And I said, okay, sure. And I was going to school at Johns Hopkins at the time to get a degree in international relations. Well, and he was working at the Pentagon for real, opening up this hospital for kids with cancer. And we lived in the Watergate, which makes me very happy because that's like ground zero for deception. So I just love that. Yeah,
irony.
I mean, it really makes me happy. But eventually I left him. Because I couldn't verify things, and the final straw. We went out with my parents, and he talked about the Brussels sprouts, and he said they were like the best Brussels sprouts ever. And then we left the restaurant, and my parents were gone. He said, God, that was the worst meal I've ever eaten. I said, why did you lie? Like nobody cared. They didn't cook it. Like he said, I didn't want to hurt their feelings. And I thought to myself, if he's lying about that, he can lie about anything. Mm. And I said, you know what, I'm out. I'm done. So it was within a year I left. I said, something's wrong here. I'm out. A year later, I got a phone call from NCIS, which is Naval Criminal Investigative Service. And they're real. Who knew? Not Mark Harmon, but they're real. And they said there's a doctor who's writing prescriptions for narcotics, and he's using all these people's names, and you're one of them. Do you have a prescription for Vicodin and Percocet, and do you know this doctor? And I said, well, I know this doctor, but no, because I prefer Valium. And so they said, okay, well, come down and make a statement. And so that's what I did. And then I kicked into journalist mode and began investigating him and found out that majority of stuff he told me wasn't not true. But what he did, which was so brilliant, is he mixed fact with fiction. And that's what they do. And so you really don't know what's up. But the good liars are going to do that because if they can root it in something that's kind of factual or sounds factual, and especially if it's not verifiable, then, So he went to jail. I wrote a book. And so I found out he had proposed to another woman when he proposed to me. Like he had been engaged to this other woman and told her, I have to go off on a secret mission. I'll see when I come back. And the secret mission was Operation Abby. I mean, she didn't know what happened to her. He was lying to his son. He was lying to his daughter. He was lying to his ex-wife. He was lying to his family. All of these people. He was lying to people he worked with at the Pentagon because he really did work there. I mean, it was very weird. It was really weird. And he went to jail. I have not spoken to him since 2010. My book has come out. I did a podcast about it called Imposters, the Commander, because I called him the Commander as a nickname.
Once it became clear the depth and the breadth of the lies with the Commander, how did you feel initially?
Elated. After NCIS called, I was elated. I was excited, because it was like, I'm not crazy. I knew something was off because I thought to myself, 42 years old, it's not old anymore. It's the end of really when you want to think about having kids, and it's and I had wanted to adopt, and I really was interested in that idea, and so at that point, I thought, okay, I just found somebody in the nick of time. And I wasn't madly in love with him. It wasn't one of those passionate, youthful, you want to, go off together into the sunset and have sex all day long. It wasn't that. It was really, I thought he was a good dude. So in a way, it was worse. It was a worse betrayal because I can't blame my hormones, So I really felt elated when Special Agent pulled me up. I was really happy. And it also, my mother kept saying to me, investigate this guy. He had been in private practice in Beverly Hills. And she, the whole time I was with him, she said, why? Who gives up a lucrative position in Beverly Hills in private practice? I wish you could call them. And I thought, yeah, but I can't. That's not like a loving way to go into a relationship. As soon as I got the call from NCIS, I was like calling Beverly Hills. I mean, I was thrilled. So that was how I felt at first. I was really, really happy.
And it makes sense because in a way you felt whole again is what I'm hearing, right? That in these narcissistic relationships or deceitful, betraying relationships, people feel chopped up into pieces.
That's right.
And anything that helps that integration. And I mean, people will say, my heart was devastated by an affair they had. But when I realized that, they'd had multiple affairs, I actually started to feel a little better and that it wasn't me.
It's not. Well, that's it. And when I found out that he had this other woman with whom he was living in Jacksonville. And, and again, it all made, and I was suspicious. I had said, let's go. When we moved into the Watergate, he still had bags that he needed to move from Jacksonville to Washington. And I said, let's drive down and pick them up. And he said, no, I'm going to have them shipped. And the reason was because he had been living with a woman whom he had proposed to. So he didn't want me to find that out. And again, and then I think, it's very hard to parse out the person and the woman and the journalist in me because I knew there was a story there. On some level, there was going to be a story. And I knew I was going to uncover it on some level. And I think in retrospect, and this is a whole other issue, but I think I wanted a career more than I wanted the guy. So it makes me, and this is looking back on it, kind of makes me wonder what my own agenda was, in a way.
I want to run with that.
Yeah.
You're saying that I wanted the career more than the guy. Are you saying that because of because you stuck in the relationship? He promised these big things. I wanted to change my life at the time. So I went back to school for this, what I call my second useless master's, in international relations at Johns Hopkins. And I wanted to change what I was covering. I wanted to cover either, do like war correspondence. I wanted to really cover different kinds of things that I was writing about. I had written a book at that point about childhood obesity, and I didn't want to, do that kind of health stuff anymore. And he promised me a big life. And, we were going to go to the embassies and we were going to, do all of these big things in Washington. And, he, of course, the White House was always calling for his expertise. And, we're going to go there soon. The Obamas are going to have us over. Of course they weren't going to have us over because they didn't know who the guy was. I mean, and I kept... In my head, I always thought, you're lying. I know you're lying to me. I mean, I told friends, this guy's messing with me, but I don't know what it is. So when I say I wanted a bigger life. And the truth is, I didn't want a guy to give me a bigger life. I wanted to get the bigger life myself. And I got the bigger life on the back of a guy because I got to tell this story that has resonated with so many people and happened to be very timely. And how do you feel about that you got the bigger life on the back of a guy? How does that affect you?
I'm happy about that. I wanted that. I get to meet you. I didn't know what my next career move was going to be at the time. So this is going back 10 years already, 12 years. So it really gave me what I wanted. It opened up many doors in terms of, I did a podcast. I did a documentary about other things. I'm working in other spaces. So I'm happy about that. Would I like to have a private life? Would I like to have a partner who I really adored and, dug? Yeah, sure.
Okay.
That hasn't happened.
Okay, that hasn't happened.
That hasn't happened.
What I think an existentialist might argue that you turned your pain into opportunity and growth.
Monetize suffering. And I joke, it's not like I got rich in the slightest, but I joke, that's my joke. It's just like when life gives you lemons, you make lemon meringue pie, right?
That's good. That's much more aspirational.
Much
than
more
lemonade.
aspirational.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
So yes.
I want to take a step backwards though, because we talked about how you felt when you got the when you found out from NCIS contacts you, which I didn't even know that was a thing. I thought that was a TV show.
Totally
So I'm
real.
like, okay,
Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Totally.
The real NCIS calls you. You're like, okay, I see that this is what I suspected. There's an elation you have. How did you feel while you were in the relationship and all these lies and this gaslighting were happening to you?
I didn't know which way was up. I had written a birthday card to my friend's kid. I asked the commander if he would mail it. He said, sure. My friend's kid never got it. And I was like, I don't understand. You didn't, he said, you said you did it. You said you did it. Like, why are you lying to me? He said, I really did it. And it turned out I had forgotten to put a stamp on it. So, but I was like not knowing if I could trust him about anything. I didn't know if I could trust myself. I didn't know. I really felt like Ingrid Bergman, in Gaslight. I felt like somebody was flickering the lights on me and telling me I was making them up.
Just to clarify on why nobody would want to be Ingrid Bergman in a relationship, Ingrid Bergman played the role of Paula, who was gaslighted in the film that started it all, Gaslight. She is the OG survivor of narcissistic abuse. The film gets its name from the flickering gaslights that Paula kept noticing, but that her gaslighting partner told her weren't flickering, and that she was paranoid and unstable.
And I thought, this might be my last chance at finding a partner, at doing that thing, and he's a good guy. And I thought I was blowing it by being so suspicious.
So it's that, and right there, right to wit.
That's what you're looking for.
That's the narcissistic.
There you go. That's my gift.
So, but that's the narcissistic relationship right there. What is it about me? It's all here. And the problem is in these relationships, the above the line stuff looks great. Doctor, Jewish, successful, embassies, White House, like it all looks good. It's the below the line that teaches us the narcissism of it all. We feel it. Like, I don't know which way is up. I don't feel comfortable. Those are the things you're saying. Ingrid Bergman.
Yeah.
Right? No one should ever feel like Ingrid Bergman in a relationship. Well, maybe
but
Casablanca.
But it would be nice if we looked like her.
Right. Yes, right. Maybe Casablanca, Ingrid. But even then, that didn't quite work out.
It didn't work well.
So, but all of that's happening. That's below the line. At the above the line is this looks great. And so you call yourself suspicious.
Yeah. I thought I was suspicious. And I remember thinking, and again, what he would always do is malign his ex-wife. Of course. It's always the ex-wife's problem. Yeah. I didn't know he'd been married twice before. I found the ex-wife and and then I found out, of course, he never met his ex-wife and the second ex-wife in Iran. He'd never been to Iran. She'd never been to Iran. They met in medical school. And he left his first wife so all these things.
And NCIS contacts you. So now you're feeling, again, more whole. You talked about feeling happy, okay, and elated. What other feelings were you having?
Relief.
Okay, relief.
I felt relieved. I was just like, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not imagining things. I didn't just blow the best thing that ever happened to me because this is not a reliable person. This is not a reliable narrator. This is a really screwed up individual.
In that way, you got a gift that a lot of survivors of these relationships don't get.
I know that.
They live in regret for years. Did I make a mistake? Is this new person getting the better version of it? Did I give up on whatever it was? In your case, it might have been embassies, and someone else is just, did I give up on the secure home, the this, the that? And so they don't get the NCIS moment.
I know they don't. And I think that's one of the reasons that I was able to write a book and I'm not, I don't feel like a victim. I don't even feel like a survivor. You know what? I feel like a sufferer. I feel like I suffered something. I don't use the word survivor. It's just my own pet thing, and I certainly don't use victim. I suffered through this experience, and then I stopped suffering, and about it, and because I learned about it. I mean, the way to deal with it was I had to learn about this, and what struck me with so many people who had been in these kind of relationships, nobody wanted to talk about it, or at least certainly not publicly. And I was telling my cab driver, I was telling everybody because it was a story. It was a good story. But everybody felt so ashamed.
Yes.
And I thought, well, what's the worst thing you did? You trusted and somebody lied to you. Like, that's not a crime. That's not stupid. That's actually the way the world works. We have to trust. Because if we don't trust, the society will not function.
What do you think is holding survivors back then? What's the source of shame?
they think that they missed something. They think, why was I so gullible? They, they think that they should have been able to see something in advance. They should have been strong. Studies have been done, actually, that the smarter you are, the more likely you are to have been duped or to be duped because you think that you'll spot it. So you're vulnerable to your vulnerability. You have no idea, just how susceptible you are. And in my instance, I'll tell you something else. He told me he had been held hostage. I told you.
It's a lot of hostage taking. A lot of hostage taking. Relationship.
And actually, he was taking other people, women hostage, right? At least mentally. How's that for a nice therapy issue? But he would sleep with the lights on and he would sleep with the TV on. And in the middle of the night, he had nightmares, screaming nightmares. And this is all for real. I was next to him. And I remember thinking, well, that's evidence right there. You don't scream bloody murder in the middle of the night unless something bad happened. Yeah. So it was, I still don't know. His ex-wife and I, who became friendly, the second one, she said, what was that? Like, what do you think happened? And she said, I guess he just had nightmares, I don't know why. I don't know what his background was. I don't know. But it was really interesting. And so that, again, people think, I don't know if you watched The Tinder Swindler. You had one of them on.
Women, yeah.
So they thought they had evidence. They thought this guy, they met. So then you do your due diligence and you think, okay, I'm looking at all the ducks and they're all seeming to be lined up. And then you realize they're not. You think, well, how do I trust anything? But in a way, that makes it much easier for you, doesn't it? Because if the ducks line up, you're looking around, you're seeing everything seems to make sense, then you're absolutely absolved. It's really not your fault.
Right, and I'm going to make the argument it never was your fault in the first place. That's I think that the challenge is that people are looking for that fault to get lifted.
Well,
right?
I think there's also people. Why do people feel such shame? Because nobody wants to be taken for a ride.
No,
I didn't lose any money. It would be, in fact, I was living for free. So I did okay. People who've lost a lot of money. Yeah, that's really. Heartbreaking. But what's interesting is that the people I know who've been emotionally betrayed and didn't lose money in a way feel worse because it's you understand somebody doing it for money. You understand but you don't understand somebody messing with you for absolutely no reason, just because they're playing chess with your life. It doesn't make sense. What did this guy get from me? If I was going to try and deceive somebody, I could go to some heiress. I could go to some supermodel. Not that he would have gotten one, but, there was other people than a loud mouth journalist who is going to research the hell out of you. So it was not smart on his part. What
do you think he got? He got something.
He did. No, I think, I can be fun. I can be funny. I think, I think there's a part of him that was intrigued by me. I think I'm pathologically independent. Maybe he felt that was a challenge to try and rein that in. Who knows?
Did you ever stop to think, though, that you are a journalist, you are an investigator, that you are a bigger fish to land if he could deceive you?
Yeah, but yes, I think that's right.
What happened when you were in the relationship and you called him out on a lie?
He would attack me.
Oh, he would attack
you. Don't trust. You interrogate me. In fact, I once called his brother-in-law and said, I don't know how to talk to him. He said, you got to go easy on him. He's got a really important job. He's doing really important things. So it's my fault.
It gets us into this tricky territory of a lie versus a gaslight, right? Because that's one of the big debates out there. What's the difference? And you had both, right? So the lie is sort of is how the person walks in the door, whatever it is. For anything from jobs he had to CIA to hostage situations, right? That's a lie. Okay, it is a twist of fact. It's completely untrue. You're suspicious, you don't trust, what's wrong with you, that's the gaslight.
Right. That's right.
I think that people get confused by that. And I think it's a really important distinction. Because a liar caught in a lie, when they're given an evidence base,
they will gaslight you.
A liar when caught in a lie who's not a gaslighter might cop to it.
They got me. Right.
But it's the conversion to gaslighting is when you give them the evidence, you're the paranoid, untrusting, suspicious, whatever you were being called. Then now the conversation's shifted away from the evidence onto you.
Right.
as you're the problem.
That's right. Well, it's what Lance Armstrong did, wasn't it? Everybody else has a problem. All you people, investigate me. You know, you're at fault.
That's right.
Exactly what it was.
And that deflection is every one of these liar/gaslighters. So
Right.
I think that's an important element here, and I know a lot of people are so confused. When he was with you, I just want to be clear, he was engaged to someone else.
He was engaged to someone else whom he left. They were living together in Jacksonville. He actually left a bunch of his belongings there.
Right.
She sold them. He never came back for them.
Okay.
She didn't know what happened to him. He and I, he's living with his brother and sister-in-law in Georgetown. I then move to D.C. We move into the Watergate. And ostensibly we're going to get married in November. And it was very quick. I mean, at that point, it would have been maybe 8 months that we were seeing each other.
That's quick.
But again, I was 42. He was 58. My parents met, at the Catskills at Grossinger's, and they're
Wow.
like 60 years later, they're still together. They were married within 3 months. So, I mean, I'm not saying that's a relationship. Love them both. Not saying it's a relationship I want to emulate ever. But it's possible. It's possible to have that again when you're older. So and people say when you know. And I wasn't a kid. Like I said, it wasn't like this hormonal response. It was. I thought he was a good person. He was solid. And then once I start hearing him screaming at the middle of the night and all these things don't make sense to me, and I don't understand why, is when I began thinking.
Did you ever ask him why he screamed in the middle of the night?
Yeah, he was tortured. He was tortured. He had nightmares about being tortured in China. Duh. They would beat him in the middle of the night. And thank God that he had been a runner, long-distance runner in college, because that's how he escaped.
Okay.
From his cell.
Something happened to this dude.
Clearly.
Screaming tantrums.
Clearly.
In an adult male. That's not an unusual post-traumatic stress
Clearly.
presentation.
That's right. So I'm not crazy.
Okay. So that tracks. And compartmentalization is associated with trauma. He was compartmentalizing, having relationships, multiple simultaneous, like keeping not only simultaneous relationships going, but hundreds of simultaneous lies going.
And while he was with me, just so you know, he reached out to an old girl. After I kind of left him, I guess, he had reached out to an old girlfriend from 30 years ago. And after he and I officially broke up, he started hanging out with her. She had cancer. She died of cancer, but he was actually there for the last year of her life. And I talked to her after I found it all out about, what had gone on. And NCIS called me, and she actually helped nail him. She helped nail him because he lied to her so badly and about so many things. And she ended up wearing a wire. And it's all on my podcast, Imposters, the Commander. But anyway, it was, to me that was like it was predatory. You're preying on a woman who's dying of breast cancer. I mean, that to me is criminal.
You've now talked to all these people because you did your research for your book. What I'm hearing is he lied to every single one.
Every single one. Every single one. His ex, wives, kids, girlfriends, in-laws.
How did this relationship affect you in the long term?
In a good way.
Okay.
Because I have always been told you're too fast. You think too quickly. You speak too quickly. You do things too quickly. You just do things you're spontaneous and impulsive, and I am. And it really made me slow down, which is not to say, because it made me slow down with relationships. It made me slow down with what I was kind of really had to stop and look at what my own responsibility was here. And again, if when I was, so at 6 years after that, after him, I met another guy who told me that he was separated from his wife. And the joke is that they were separated the way you and I are separated, like by a microphone. They were not separated. They were just living together. And, but like technically I'm in the bathroom, she's in the bedroom. We're separate. And it was awful because, it was such a cliche. It was like, I'm lying to you about being married. That's not psychopathic. I don't think that's just being an asshole, right? The clinical diagnosis is asshole. But I understood why that happened. I didn't understand why. I get it. Like, he wanted to hang out with me, and I get it. The other one I didn't get. I didn't understand that. And again, why not an heiress? Why do you have to give me a ring? I mean, it was a shitty ring, but why do you have to do that? Why do you have to propose? It didn't make sense to me. And what I realized is that, you know what? As I get older, there are things that I might not understand, and I think that's okay. And the other thing it made me realize, in addition to slowing down, was that, how do I say this? People don't know themselves. I used to think people understood themselves. I used to think people really knew why they did things, and they don't.
I'd be out of a job if they did.
Well, right. You would. Right. You would. But I really thought people had much more self-awareness. Because I have a pretty good self-sense, that, and they don't. And I also thought people are really one thing, and they're not at all. They're very complicated. And that's a good thing to know, because it actually has helped me. Like hypocrites, I understand. I don't like hypocrites. I think most people don't. But I actually have a little bit more tolerance, because I understand why people do that to some degree. So,
actually,
I don't think they know. I think there's, because of this lack of awareness. I think one part of the brain doesn't really know what or they compartmentalize so much, that they just, part A is not talking to part B, and so that's what I think. I don't know. You're the expert. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Oh, good.
It absolutely does make sense. I think that it gets into a complicated place, right? This idea of self-awareness is, if anything, we could use self-awareness as sort of the antidote to these antagonistic personality styles like narcissism, right? By definition, these are not self-aware styles. There's no self-awareness of how is my behavior affecting someone else. What is the long downstream effect of my behavior? That's gone. Very little awareness of how what I'm doing could be hurting and affecting another person. That's the core conflict.
So, which is to say, when someone lies about being not married and they have a wife at home, or they're leading a double life, or your spouse or whatever, that's narcissistic behavior, is it not?
There are people out there who have double lives for lots of reasons. Some people have double lives. Honestly, it wouldn't be unusual to see in a post-traumatic presentation that person is that successful at compartmentalizing to such a level that they're doing these things and are just not thinking about, like, they've locked these things up separately, and with little regard for how this would be found out. I think narcissism is definitely high on the list of differentials, because there's a real lack of empathy for how this would, if his wife found out that he was walking around saying he wasn't married, there's a complete, no empathic awareness or attunement to what his wife would want. Psychopathy's in the mix, because they can outlie a narcissism all day, all night.
Well, I think,
narcissist.
I think the other thing is, you don't lie to the mistress. That's just stupid. The reason you're the mistress is so you don't get lied to.
By definition, I'd say the mistress does get lied to a lot.
They do.
Because already this is a person who has entered the deceit club.
That's
right. So now, from that point forward, it's all lies all the time, because this lie is working. And you've done more research on this than I have. Does lying beget lying?
100%. 100%. Because you have to keep all the stories straight. And then when you get caught on something, it's like, but this doesn't make sense. Why? Well, and then you tell another lie, For example, I was driving by the Watergate one night, and I see the light on. And so I called him. I was like, and he had said, I have to move out of the Watergate because the Navy needs the apartment, and the Navy was paying for the apartment. And he really was a Navy doc, for real. But he said, so I'm going to move out. That's why I'm sending all your stuff away. And so the light was on, and I emailed him, and I said, are you back in the apartment? He said, yeah, it was a comedy of errors. He said, I packed everything, and I moved it out into storage, and then the Navy said, you know what? You got to come back. I said, really? I said, well, you know what? My cookbooks are there, and I'd like to pick them up, which is the biggest lie of all, because I don't cook, and I don't like to cook. But I did have these cookbooks because I thought, I'm going to be in this relationship. Maybe we'll cook, and, that's what we'll do on winter nights. We'll make soup, So he's like, all right. And so I went one afternoon just to poke around at the Watergate. And I said, I want to go up to the apartment. I did not have a key. And the guy at the front desk said, you're not allowed up. Specifically, you are not allowed up. Abby Ellin is not allowed up. So I said, why? He said, I don't know. That's all I had here. So I called the guy up, the commander. I said, what's up with that? He said, there was an attack in the building, and they're cracking down on who they will let up. Okay, so this speaks about lying begetting lying. And I thought, what? So I said, okay, fine, right. So he finally lets me into the apartment so I can pick up the cookbooks. And I go there, and everything is exactly as it was when I left. Down to a sliver of soap in the soap dish. I mean, it was the dude didn't move out. He didn't even wash it, you know? And I said, you never moved out. And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, oh, yes, I did. And that's when I thought, there is no discussion. So yes, this lying begets lying. This is my story and I'm sticking to it, except when I veer to the left and I make something else up. It was just confounding.
Okay, I'm going to say one thing here, though, because I want people to understand is that you said something really interesting in your book, a line that jumped out at me, is what no one realized, what I didn't realize then, was that I was in an abusive relationship.
I was.
Not physically, but emotionally for sure.
It was. Mm-hmm. It was 100% abusive. And I think those relationships can be harder on some level because at least to other people, they see when you have a black eye. Yeah. Nobody understands. And let's be clear about something. We were talking about shame and why people feel such shame. The rest of the world condemns you if you've been duped. What did you do? How could you be such an idiot?
Always.
How could you have not known that? How did you not know? Why would you believe that they were held hostage in China? I mean, why would, why didn't you know that they had another family around the corner? I mean, all of these things.
In story after story, to that point, when we've had people who have been in these sort of con situations on this podcast, that came up over and over again. And as we'd researched the stories, it was always so striking to me, was it wasn't even like a few people were blaming them. I'm almost going with majority.
They do.
We're saying, well, I wouldn't have been played like that. And I want to say, that means you are going to be played.
That's what I'm saying. The smarter you are, the more convinced you are that you wouldn't be taken for a ride. The more likely you will be.
Yeah.
And that was why I didn't. So many people want to know about their psychology. And that's where you come in.
And that's what we're going to talk about next. Right. The psychology of lying.
Well, the psychology of lying, again, I was more interested in the victims, but the liars are fascinating. Why do they lie? Why? You tell me. They lie. This is what I know. They lie because they have bad self-esteem. They lie because there's something wrong with their brain. They lie because they like stories. They lie because they think they can get away with it. They lie because they can get away with it. Here's a question. Do you think lying to that degree is a symptom or its own diagnosis?
You know how I approach this? And to me, when I look at lying, I come at it as a behaviorist would. Human beings do things because they're rewarded. They're rewarded for the lie.
And the more popular kids are the kids who tell lies.
And that's something you wrote about in your book.
Right.
Could you talk about that? Because actually, that was actually a killer
fascinating,
finding.
right? Because they're fun and they have good stories and people like to be around them and they know how to charm people, right? These people are charming. I mean, the guy I was with was not really good looking, but he was charming and fun, and he always, he knew what interested people and he knew how to talk to them. I think there's also something else, which is that these people believe it themselves eventually. Yeah. And which is why there's, I always talk to people about polygraphs. And there's no such thing as a lie detector. It's and it measures anxiety. It measures the way your heart beats. It measures that. So if you don't believe you've lied, you're going to pass a test.
So, and this is where we get into we're talking about like this whole, the reasons people lie. I felt like your story of the commander. I don't know him. I've never seen him. I could not render a meaningful clinical opinion. But the patterns you laid out in your story of the commander, that depth and breadth and consistency and sweep of lying feels more like it's in the psychopathy neighborhood.
I thought he was a psychopath. His ex-wife thought he was a narcissist.
Narcissistic people lie, but like I said, they cannot lie as well as psychopathic people. And here's why. You did something in your book. You wrote down every lie you told for 6 months.
I did.
Okay? Talk about that for a minute, because then I'm going to bring it back to what we're talking about.
I curated a lie log because I wanted to see just how much I lied. And I found that I tell lies. I mean, mostly they're white lies, though. And the research shows that women lie to make other people feel good and men lie to make themselves feel good and look good. And that's exactly what my guy did. I mean, he was, James Bondstein. But But I do that. I lie I have lied to make people feel good, and I don't have a problem with that. What do you think of that? I want you to tell me this was the most fascinating interview you've ever done.
Yep.
I will believe you. I won't, but I'll like it.
And I get it. And I want you to tell me this is my color. So,
Yes.
So I completely agree with you. And I think that that's one thing is that lies, like narcissism, like everything in the world, is on a continuum.
Correct.
Right? And if I told everyone what I honestly thought of their dress, what they look like, and who they are, nobody left in my life.
You would have no friends. I know that,
no.
and we've had movies about that.
Yeah.
There was that Jim Carrey movie, right? And there
Liar,
wasn't the Liar Liar. What was the Ricky Gervais one? He did one. I don't remember the name of it, but
I know what you're talking about.
The theory of I don't know. He's I love him. You cannot tell people the truth all the time. You can but yet you have to trust. We have to trust the car is going to stop at the red light and not bash into us. And I actually have been thinking about more and more. I'm a terrible jaywalker in New York, not in Los Angeles. I know it's legal, but in New York, and I'm like, I'm stupid. Why do I assume these cars are going to stop for me?
Again, going back to, yes, we need to be able to trust, but why do people lie? And psychopathic lying, narcissistic lying, and then the lying we all do. The commander situation, depth, breadth, all of it, that felt more like psychopathy, right?
And I think he really, really had terrible self-esteem. And I really believe that. No, he did.
Okay.
And he needed to puff himself up.
Okay.
Which is a very obvious response, but I think it's true in that case.
The self-esteem issue now pulls me back more into a narcissistic place, right? So psychopathy is interesting because it has a really strong biological piece to it, right? It's a down-regulated autonomic nervous system. So when I tell a lie, it is so clear. My face turns red. I sweat. I couldn't even play poker if I wanted to. And if you hooked a lie detector up to me now, it would just go off like it was the 4th of July. Because I can't lie. It is I can tell you.
You can tell me. Yeah, you told me that this is my color.
I wasn't lying. I wasn't lying.
Nah.
But I did tell a friend the other day, like, I liked the dress, and I thought the dress was absolutely hideous. So I can lie. I can tell those pro-social lies. As you call them, right?
Which make the world go round.
Correct. But what you're talking about, this is a different animal. Narcissistic people will often lie to save face, to look good, to get validation, to get supply. Psychopathic people don't need supply. They need power and dominance. So the lie allows them to maintain control.
But they go together. Can you be a psychopathic narcissist? Sure you can. No?
No. I mean, I do think that they're separate entities. I really do, Abby.
Okay.
I think that psychopathy is a very rarefied space. It is, heaven above, thank you, that it is rare. Because it's dangerous. It's dangerous because when a person's not getting that kind of, this doesn't feel good to do this, that's actually it's a disincentive to do something bad. For a narcissistic person, they do actually think, I don't want to be the bad person. And they'll often look guilty and sweaty and all of that. They'll still lie to be able to cheat on a spouse. They may still lie to cook the books. But the psychopathic liar is a much more successful liar because they don't have a tell.
And they don't have empathy.
But nor do the narcissists.
And then the question from everything I've read is that psychopaths really cannot be treated.
I think that what we've seen is that, I'm not going to give the long academic version here, is that the treatment literature it's not convincing. They're not going to go into therapy unless they're court ordered. If they are court ordered, they're often going to outwit the therapist.
Right.
There has been some interesting work where they've attempted to simulate empathy, like want you to imagine someone going through a sad situation. And some imaging studies have shown that when you can force empathy by them reacting to a situation, areas of the brain will light up that are empathy areas of the brain which ordinarily don't automatically light up the way they would for someone else.
And what about with narcissists?
Narcissistic people have very selective, they have actually more of a capacity for empathy. It's not fair to say a narcissistic person doesn't have empathy. They use it transactionally. Mm-hmm. It's quite performative. Mm-hmm. It tends to be more cognitive. So I understand why you're sad versus having that, oh my gosh, my friend is sad. I need, I want to be with her. I need to hold, and just sit with that person and hold that space with them. There's a different game. And when the narcissistic person feels safe well-regulated, secure, in a good place, actually they can be quite empathic. Because it's almost like they're not hungry.
Right.
They're good. And when they're in that place, they're not missing the chip. In psychopathy, you're talking about someone missing a chip.
Right.
But in narcissism, the chip is just an old, slow processor. And it's a selfish processor. And so everything in their life has to be perfect. And then they can bring empathy. But that can actually mean narcissistic people lie. They're just not as successful.
So we were talking about George Santos.
Mm-hmm.
Is he a psychopath?
I would say that, again, I've never met or treated George Santos giving that, but I'd say somebody who's able to successfully pursue a political office, and not some local small town council. We're talking a federal political office, successfully run a campaign, fundraise, win the race, take and go in despite all of this being found out and never breaking gaze.
I know. I know.
That's definitely more in this advanced, like we think of it more in the psychopathy.
Yeah.
And then some people say, are all these states delusional? Do they believe their own hype? But the fact is they're able to pull this off. George Santos was sworn in officially as a member of Congress in 2022, but on the back of multiple fabrications, which he met with, quote, "My sins here are embellishing my resume." I'm sorry. Embellishing is an understatement. His exaggerations include not being truthful about working at two prominent Wall Street banks, that he had obtained degrees in finance and economics from two New York colleges, that he was Jewish, and that 4 employees of his company were killed in the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida in June of 2016, and even more lies. None of these things were true, and yet that did not stop him from being elected to higher office.
Right.
So
I think it is delusional. I think it is psychopathic, and I just think were they born this way or were they made? I don't know the answer. Nobody seems to know the answer. There was a point where people were distinguishing between sociopaths and psychopaths. Everything I had read said that actually some people seem to use them interchangeably. Other people said they're not the same.
They're not.
So some people say the sociopaths were made and the psychopaths were born that way. I don't know which is which.
What we see is that psychopathy does have there appears to be something in that sort of that autonomic nervous system thing. There seems to be something genetic there. It's a work in progress, right? We're figuring this out. The fact is, a person who might have the genetics may also be coming into a home where there's a psychopathic parent. So how much of this is modeled? How much of it is the chaos that can ensue? There's definitely a stronger evidence base for psychopathy and genetics. Narcissism, not nearly as much. Narcissism definitely seems to be a social and developmental kind of an issue around attachment and early relationships and all of that. Sociopathy, an entirely different beast. Psychopathic people, cool, calm, collected. Sociopathic people, not so calm and collected. They tend to be a bit more reactive. And that speaks then to probably more of a traumatic origin.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Interesting, because that's, I don't know what page, but somewhere in there I talked about how it was used interchangeably, because that's what I had read. Yeah,
they're not interchangeable.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Need to make a correction.
So in terms of another thing that you talked about in your book, and I think it's really worth mentioning, I'm going to read. I'm going to read to you from your own scripture.
I want some milk and cookies. Read it.
And it's interesting. Harold Sackheim, which talk about a little bit of Jungian synchronicity. Harold Sackheim was one of my professors when I started a PhD program at NYU 52 million years ago when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And I ended up transferring from NYU to UCLA. And I remember, and Harold Sackheim also worked up at New York State Psychiatric Institute, where I had done some of my research internships. So it was like a whole Harold Sackheim universe. So when you interviewed him, I have tremendous respect for his work. And you talk here about self-deception. And this piece from Harold Sackheim's work, the people who were the happiest were the ones who were lying to themselves more. And then someone else talks about the realists, according to Joanna Starek, a clinical psychologist, said, the realists tend to be slightly more depressed than others. And Sackheim says, they see how horrible people are, what their weaknesses are, and the problem is they're right. I remember reading this and laughing. I'm like, oh yeah, as a miserable realist, I got you. So talk about self-deception, because I thought that was really interesting.
Well, who do we deceive the most? And again, I believe that we have to deceive ourselves, unfortunately. I have this favorite story, which is that I was walking by a window in New York City, and I saw my reflection, and I thought, damn, I look good. Then I realized I was looking at someone else. And but I thought, this is good. I wish I hadn't realized that, because it would be nice. It's like when you go to and you look in the mirror and it's one of those tall, skinny mirrors, and you think, I really look hot. You don't need to know that. So I wish I was able to be fooled more. I really do. Had I not opened my mouth, I could have been married to this guy. I really could have been. Thank God I opened my mouth. But I could have really gone, a long way. And I remember actually right after I got engaged to him, I owned my apartment in New York. And I called a lawyer and I said, can this guy get his hands on my apartment? And they said, no, not unless you give it over to him. I said, what about debt? What if he has debt? Do I incur that? They said, whatever he comes into the marriage with, you don't. But whatever after, it's yours. And I remember thinking, that's going to be a problem. So I think people who live in a state of denial are a lot happier.
Yes, and however, you could also see the danger for entering and staying in a narcissistic relationship or a psychopathic or toxic relationship. That's
okay, so figure this out. Ignorance is bliss, but knowledge is power.
Right.
Work that out.
Okay, yeah, great. So let's break that down.
Okay.
Ignorance is bliss and knowledge is power. So the question is, what do you want more, bliss or power?
I think that changes depending on where you are in your life.
And I don't actually think that ignorance is bliss, because I look at survivors, and I do use the word survivor, because I actually think you are a survivor. I don't think you're a sufferer. I think you suffered.
I suffered. I don't
right?
think of myself as a sufferer now.
Okay.
I was a sufferer.
However, you suffered, and you came out of it.
I suffered.
You did suffer. And people in these relationships. Yes, people in these relationships suffer, okay? I think that the narrative is, and then people say, and now I'm broken, right? And so they stay and suffer. And you got out of this, you survived it, right? And as much as one could survive graduate school, one could survive recession, you're still standing on the other side, right? Mm-hmm. So that language said, ignorance wasn't bliss for them. And they tried. They tried.
Ignorance was bliss until it became known. You don't know what you don't know. I'm
going to push back on that.
Okay, go. Good.
It's not that you don't know what you don't know. They're suffering. In your case, it was a deceit, gaslighting, manipulation, heavy relationship. I
100%.
hear that. For other people, it's the push-pull between really good days and really bad days and blaming themselves for that. Mm-hmm. It's the being compared to other people. It's dealing with the angel at the dinner party and the monster in the car on the ride home. It could be betrayals. It could be infidelities, all of that. They're suffering, okay? They're often trivialized. Their goals are laughed at. They're mocked. They're held in contempt. It's suffering, right? And so this is all happening to them, and they are suffering, but they don't have a name for the suffering.
And they don't know why.
They don't know why. All they know is, I am so unhappy. I'm not supposed to be. Everyone said we looked really good at the dinner party. I am miserable. Maybe, and I hear this from survivors every time I talk to them, I think, what am I complaining about? There's people who are homeless.
Well, that's right.
There are people who are suffering more. There are people getting beaten up. What am I complaining about?
That's right.
And I'm thinking, you're being emotionally devastated on the daily.
you're being emotionally manipulated and betrayed.
Right.
And yeah.
So the ignorance in that case is that they're actually having an experience, a physical, psychological experience that doesn't have a name.
I appreciate that. What about the people who live in these relationships and these marriages and they're totally happy and they do not suspect their husband has another family around the corner?
Like a Stepford kind of a thing, or just really?
Just like really.
Okay. So
just ignorant. They're living
Okay.
their best life. They're doing what they do, and they have no idea.
I guess it's actually a really, really good question.
Thank you.
Is that somebody would be, and we've all known people like that. I've had friends who were in relationships that were just riddled with deceit. And then there was the moment, somehow something got found out. And I think with internet and the digital age we're in, it's a lot harder to keep a lie covered up, right? But then I have to say that the devastation at that point, it's a different, like in other words, now the blast zone is going to be that much larger. And folks in those situations where they manage to not see it sometimes feel after it all blows up, that they're complicit.
Well, sure, because then all of a sudden they're like, "What did I miss? What did I not see? What did I willingly not see?" Right?
Well, yes, right, and it wasn't even willingly. Like maybe, I mean, again, unconscious processes aren't willing processes, and then we curve into interesting territory around things like culture, Abby. That when there's no option. Divorce is simply not an option.
Right.
Breaking up a family is simply not an option. That kind of denial, unseeingness is survival and safety. Because to see it and have to stay in it is a very specific kind of hell on earth.
Okay.
I do think that those things are all operating in terms of how people get stuck. And that is when we have had guests on here, we had one guest in particular, Jen Faison from Betrayed, who perfect life, and then one day comes home to a search warrant on her door, and then they watch her husband be taken away, and that was the last time she ever saw him.
I did a piece about white-collar wives, and it ran in the Times, and it was about these women whose husbands were white-collar offenders, and the women had no idea. They say. And yet then you uncover the layers a little bit and they're like, well, I had a reason not to know. And the reason I had to not know or ask questions was because I liked the life we lived.
Yes.
And I liked the money you made. And I liked the car I had. And, there was, and I think in that sense, there's a sense of complicity because they were.
I hear that. And I think that and I still don't think it's a sense of complicity because ultimately they weren't committing the wrongdoings. Right? I mean,
well, they weren't committing the wrongdoing. It's so interesting because Bernie Madoff's wife.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah.
Do we think I think she knew maybe something was not kosher, but she didn't. Listen, I can barely add. So if I had been married to Bernie Madoff, I wouldn't know what he was doing, but I might say something might not be right here. But I don't really want to know. What I don't know doesn't hurt me. So that am I complicit? I mean, that's like a question for the rabbis. I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
It's a tough one. An analogy I've often used is around magic tricks and magicians, right? Because even adults like going to magicians. It's not kids.
And I hate going to magicians because I need to know how they do it.
Bingo.
Drive me bonkers.
Here's the thing. A lot of people go to a magician and they're content to not know how the trick was done. Because once you show how the trick is done, it's not magic anymore.
That's right.
And I think that
you're complicit.
Right. Are you complicit? I refuse to believe I was complicit with the guy at Magic Castle.
I think you were. That's the contract between the audience. The audience has to be willing to be duped.
Yeah, and I wanted to believe the spoon was being bent.
You were. Everybody was complicit but you.
Thank you.
No. I mean, but the emperor has no clothes. The audience was complicit.
Right. Yeah,
the city, whatever it was, the village.
Right. It's an interesting one because then once we know how the trick is done, again, the magic is gone. The charade is over, and that's that's tricky.
And you become the miserable depressive who is no longer living in denial.
Harold Sackheim's realist.
There you go.
Right. And so that's tricky. When we talk about narcissism and toxic relationships, we often don't deconstruct like we are right now because we're really focusing on a pattern that characterizes these relationships, but it's not all of it. And yet, you see, it kind of is all of it. Because if you lie, systemically lie, not you look good in that dress lie, systematically lie, you're entitled because you feel like you can hold the monopoly on truth. You lack empathy because you don't care about what your deceit is doing to the other person. You're arrogant because you think you're above all of us. You're grandiose because at some level you must believe your own hype that you are the great, trickster of our time. And you hold the power.
That's right.
So all of that, even though we're talking about a behavior, that all of that behavior pings into all of these elements of the bigger picture is antagonism, but then we could boil that down to narcissism and psychopathy. Mm-hmm. When you were in the relationship, did you ever stop to think, I'm in a relationship with a narcissist, I'm in a relationship with a psychopath? Mm-hmm. You did.
Mm-hmm. He said to me at one point, I'm not a psychopath. I said, yeah, you are.
Okay.
No, I did. And that, for whatever reason, and that's a whole other podcast, I was never in this thing 100%. I always had a foot out the door. I've been freelance my whole life okay. So there's definitely a relationship. There's a connection there. So, and I think I kept a foot out because I knew it wasn't going to work out on some level in my gut. Mm-hmm. I just knew it, and that's why I say I wanted the career. I wanted the story. I had to stick it out until I had concrete proof this person was a liar. Instead of these fantastical things I couldn't verify. When I had to get out for my self-esteem. But it was just like I knew there was going to be some story there. So, that's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. My shrink accused me of the same thing once. She's like, I think you keep getting into narcissistic relationships for material. I'm like, that's insensitive. And I'm like, maybe.
But it's everything is copy, But if you're not doing anything, if you're not with anybody, you're just hanging out by yourself eating bonbons, what's the copy? I ate a bad bonbon.
Right. Or
it's not that interesting.
Teach me how to live a bonbon life, because that would actually be an interesting antidote to how I live.
Well, yeah, that's true. There's that.
You do talk about, though, and I'd imagine this was a quality that might have been quite attractive in the commander, is that intelligent people tend to lie more.
And we value intelligence. And I think there's something else. We don't want to be the one person who's that kid who says, the emperor's naked. Everybody thinks, we're talking about complicity, all those people in that village said, God, the guy looks naked, but maybe I'm not seeing it right. Maybe I'm making a mistake. Nobody wants to be the one person who says, calls it out.
And in your research, did you figure out why nobody wants to be the person who wants to call it out?
Because I think it's the what I call the lemming effect. I think nobody wants to be the odd person out because nobody wants to look wrong, and to bring it all full circle, no one wants to look stupid.
Right. And then we also are shaped by other people. If you look at Solomon Asch's work, if you remember that, you might have learned that, anyone listening in psychology, that there would be 3 lines. One was clearly longer than the rest of them. And there would be a group of 9 people. They were Confederates, people working alongside the researchers were sort of like liars stuck in the group. And then a person would innocently say, I think line B is the longest, line B. And then the Confederates say line A, and then other people they would start responding. The clearly shorter line was the longest because they were affected by other people. A lot of this research actually came out of post-World War II, and people are trying to understand what happened. How could such horrors happen? How could people just have gone along like that?
Well, do you remember The Wave? Do you remember that? That was an after-school special, The Wave. It was about the kids in the school, and it was based on a real experiment where the kids some were guards, some were prisoners. And how?
You mean the you're talking
it wasn't
about,
Milgram. It wasn't Milgram.
It wasn't. Oh no, not Milgram.
Milgram was
Zimbardo.
Yes,
Zimbardo, Stanford Prison Experiment.
That's right. That's right. And they did a show called The Wave, and it was all about basically following the crowd. Right. Other people were doing this. That wasn't the whole point of that, but other people were abusing the guard. The guards were abusing the prisoners, and everybody was doing it, and so everybody continued to do it.
Right, but a huge human fear. The Stanford Prison Experiment is actually interesting because it really speaks to once we're placed into a role, how we take on that role. Because if I remember
That
correctly,
wasn't right. It wasn't.
Zimbardo randomly assigned
Zimbardo. Yes, he did.
prisoners and guards. So they were
then I think he shifted it,
And then
didn't he?
so what happened
Yeah.
was, though, he had to end the experiment early
Right.
because the guards became so abusive. But it's just a coin flip on which group you were assigned to be
That's
in.
right. That's right.
But when we get to this stuff on conformity.
They were all doing it because even though some people thought this guard A is doing it, guard B is doing it, guard C said, why? That's really bad. I shouldn't do it. But A and B are doing it, so I'm going to do it too.
Yes.
Right.
But see, all of this relates again to Solomon Ash's work on conformity. And we are a tribal species. Right?
That's
So that's human beings live in small social groups. And so to be ostracized for a human being is actually to die if you go to our primal sort of state as human beings. We can't make it alone. We can now because of the internet, but that's pretty recent.
But it's also made it that much easier to get caught.
It's made it harder too. I think we've always lied.
We
I don't think
have.
we're lying more. I think that what we're seeing is there's more evidence of the lying
Because
there's a public
The e-trail, yeah.
There's an e-trail, and the public is the media now,
That's right.
So now
That's
we're
right.
seeing the person in another country is lying. We're like, we'll caught you out in that lie. It makes it seem ubiquitous, where I don't think that I'm not convinced. In your research, did it seem like rates of lying have gone up?
People were talking about it more. And the
yeah.
reason was because back in the old days, you would have your family, you would have to have your double lives, you'd have to walk to the farm 20 miles away.
Yep.
Now you click on the button on the internet, or you have a burner phone, or you can call up a website to get a person who will pretend to be your boss. You can pay them to be, and they will give you a recommendation for a job you never had. You can get the sounds of airplanes taking off. There's so much opportunity for deception.
There is so much opportunity for deception.
There's
but
that much opportunity to get caught. But that's why I think we're talking about it more. But I think that, if George Santos stays in office and nothing happens to him, it's really going to be interesting to see what happens in the world, because people are going to say, well, why should I bother telling the truth if this guy is being rewarded for lying? We know he's making shit up, and yet...
And my counterpoint to that is going to be because most of us are wired to tell the truth.
Are we?
We are. I believe so. It's the red light. You said if we don't follow these rules on red lights, and honesty creates tighter social bonds, which are still the name of the game.
Okay, but do you think... I used to think about this a lot. The Holocaust, World War II. People had to lie to save their lives.
Yes, he did.
So... is everybody capable of that, or are there some people who are not?
Everybody's capable of it to a point. I think some people, though, that the maintaining the lie would become too much of a mental stretch for them.
They needed to survive.
They needed to survive. Not everyone was able to do it.
Not everyone survived, but
not everyone
we can't
survived.
talk to them because they're not
right.
here. Yeah.
So I think that under survival circumstances, human beings can do things, right? But we're in general. People prefer the truth because they don't have that commander-like capacity to compartmentalize and keep it all straight.
Well, it's easier to tell the truth.
It is easier to tell the truth. It is,
It is.
but there's consequences. And I
Right.
think
That's right.
that's the other piece. Do you think after the experience you've been through, and even some dating experiences you said that you went through years later and still were deceived, and everything you've learned about lying, do you feel that the only way forward is that everyone just has to keep up their guard up all the time?
I say this all the time, Reagan, trust, verify, right? Trust but verify. And I go, trust but verify, but still don't trust. I don't know how I could be involved with somebody very seriously without really checking into their past and really hiring a private eye. And I say that half facetiously, but really half not. I don't know that I could. I don't know that I could. And I don't know if that's so bad. I think the opportunity. I don't even know if I want to be involved with anybody seriously. I feel like, God, what an emotionally exhausting experience that would be, to go through somebody's mishigas and I don't know. Nah.
Do you trust other people in your life?
Well, who?
Friends?
Yes.
Family members?
Yeah.
Okay. So it has
different friends. I do, but it's very different when there's romance involved. It's very different when there's love involved. It's very different when there's hormones involved. It's very different when there's DNA involved. It's very different when there's there's so much there. It's different from a friendship. It is different. I have a lot of really good friends, and I take those relationships seriously. But I don't have to live with them.
Right. And have you had the experience of being significantly lied to in anything outside of an intimate relationship?
I have. And it's very easy to say, you're nuts, I'm out of here.
Interesting. Okay, so it's a different buy-in.
It's a different buy-in. It's a different buy-in. I got no reason, Yeah. No.
And I tell folks, your story is that, my story is that. Your relationship with trust will change.
That's exactly right. And I think I said this earlier, I don't necessarily need to know everything.
Yeah.
Like I don't need to know if it's all what it is, but I also need to know what I can accept and what untruths I cannot accept.
Yep.
I
totally agree, and I think that it gets very, very complicated. So now that you've done what you've done, what steps would you suggest, if there are any, but what steps do you suggest that people could take to protect themselves from being deceived?
In romance, like I said, I'm not opposed to hiring if you're really serious about it, I don't think there's a problem in hiring somebody to check out the records and is this person lying about their income? Are they lying about their position? I hear these I get a story a day from people who've I didn't know this was, from men, mostly women, but from men too. I didn't know they were lying about their income. They were lying about their position. They were lying about where they were from. They were lying about this. Research that. I mean, there are websites you can do online, right? There's what is it, Radar? No, I don't know. Verify, whatever they have. Trustify, Verify. What's it called?
I don't know.
One of those things that you can go online. But yeah, I would think if you need to get hard facts, you hire somebody to do it for you. I think that's smart. I think that's savvy. I think you also need to know what your tolerance level is and what you're happy to be, what you're okay being misled about and what you're okay not being misled,
It's the unsophisticated version of what you're saying of check someone out is to Google them.
Yeah, but I'm saying take it a step further.
Take it further.
Because I was seeing a guy and last year, and he didn't have a Google profile. There was something I couldn't really, and I was like, I can't do this. I mean, and I did all the things, I went and I got background records from whatever that website is that I can't remember, but at the end of the day, I couldn't do it. I just thought and he wouldn't quite tell me what his story was, and I thought, I can't do this.
So in essence, what you're really doing, you're telling people is do some homework.
Yeah,
before, especially
do your
this
homework.
isn't an intimate relational space. Let's expand this out.
Okay.
Friends, workplace, other people you're going to run into. Would you give the same guidance?
Yes.
You would? Okay.
Do you know that, what is it, 55% of people lie on their resume?
Wow.
And a lot, they make things up about, they Santos it. We're going to use them as a verb. I mean, but they've been doing this. Executives, they lie about. I mean, there was people in the book that I talked about who, they were let go for making things up, making up fake degrees, making up all this stuff. And, part of the problem that I have with them is that they're stupid because they realize they can be checked, except the flip side of that is the complicity piece is that people don't often do their due diligence.
Always check.
Right.
How much can fear of consequences do you think keep a liar in line?
Oh, it depends what the consequences are.
Fair.
Because here we are looking at this country. We have had liars. And for better or for worse, if you are a Democrat, you will think that Joe Biden hiding of his documents or forgetting his documents is not a big deal. If you don't like Trump, if you like Trump, you're going to say it's not a big deal. Same thing. But if we see somebody we clearly know fabricated, like a George Santos, and nothing happens to them, what is that going to do? What consequences are there? Why should anybody then tell the truth? Other than the hardwiredness.
Other than the hardwiredness, which actually goes farther than you'd possibly think. In your book, you focus on the lying, what happens to people, and we read it, we understand what the motivations around lying are. But what we are often, our tendency is, and there's a proverb I've used on this podcast before, is that, the tale of the hunt is always told by the hunter, not the lion. Which is we're so focused on the perpetrator, on the wrongdoer, right? So then we try to come up with interventions like, how can we change them? How can we make people not lie? And you're saying that's the wrong tree to bark up.
That's right. That's what you're saying too.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And that's what your book is doing, is saying, let's talk to what happens. Let's talk about what happens when a person is lied to.
That's right. Which is why I don't necessarily know. I never confronted this guy. I told you in the beginning.
Right.
I haven't seen him in 12 years. And I thought about it because I thought, well, it'd be a good copy, a good material for a book. And I thought, what's he going to say? He's either going to say, I didn't do anything wrong, or else he's going to say, I don't know why, or you're crazy, you're a bitch, whatever he's going to say. And I thought, what is the point here? So I never got a response because I didn't need that closure. It wasn't going to do anything.
Right.
And I think there's something very valid in that. And that was also something that because everybody said, well, you're going to talk to him. There was no need. And that's a good place to get to because you have to realize, again, you're taking care of yourself. You're putting on not your own oxygen mask, but your own pandemic mask. You're taking care of, you are protecting yourself. At the end of the day, that's who has to protect you.
And that is so important. It's unsettling, too, because people say, I want to be taken care of. It's the child in all of us that is saying, can't someone make it so I have to be on it? But unfortunately, that is part of the work, is to say, I need to, in whatever form, need to do my due diligence, whatever that looks like. The fact is, people are going to do that in different ways. But this is about you, and because you're never, ever going to make a liar stop lying.
And the very last thing I would say is if anybody is asking you for money, especially someone you've never met or you met on the internet and all of a sudden they tell you they're your boyfriend or whatever, you don't give them any money. Seriously.
No,
and that's something, it's sad, but it needs to be said.
No, it does need to be said. And I think that when we look at the various scams out there, they do prey upon the
sad, lonely people,
and a very, very human need.
Yes,
to want to be loved.
To want to be loved.
That's it. Abby, thank you so much for coming on. Just as we wrap up here, where can people find you and connect with your work?
They can find me. They can go to my website, abbyellin.com. I'm on Instagram vaguely at Abby_Ellin_author. You can buy my book on all your local, wherever you buy your books, Duped, Double Lives, False Identities, and The Con Man I Almost Married. And you can listen to the podcast I did based on the book called Imposters, The Commander, Season 2, and that is on Spotify.
In my first takeaway, many survivors feel foolish for getting duped, and this can happen whether it is a long-term committed relationship or even a short-term relationship that ends in a scam. None of us want to believe we fell for a con or were taken for a ride, but there is a danger to this mindset because it can leave survivors isolated, less likely to get help, and more likely to get lost in self-blame and shame. It doesn't feel good, but seeking out help and talking it out when you're caught in a confusing place of deceit can be absolutely crucial to healing. In this next takeaway, all liars are not narcissistic, but all narcissistic people are liars. People lie for lots of different reasons, as we have learned, and even narcissistic people tell lies for a wide range of reasons. We are often wanting simple black and white tools to be able to organize the people in our lives. Sadly, lying is a little bit too complicated to allow us to do that. Odds are that most of us don't really want people to tell us the truth about how we look in this dress. But we don't want to be lied to about big ticket issues. For our next takeaway, while Abby raised the issue of people being complicit and how they may engage with a lie or other deceit, I take a slightly different stance. Denial often plays a role, but it is an unconscious process, and it is designed to protect us from information we don't feel able to hear. Complicity implies something more active, of being an aware player in someone else's deceit. For many survivors of toxic relationships, I don't see it as complicity, but rather as a complex mix of denial, confusion, and hope. To see what is happening clearly in these relationships, to be neither in denial or complicit, means jumping into the unknown. And that can feel very unsettling. Sometimes we don't see things right away. That may simply be self-protective at a primitive level. So in this takeaway, when Abby finally understood the depth of the lies and got confirmation, although she was elated, she also learned that there is no such thing as a clean slate. These relationships do change us. Our slates have some marks on them that just don't disappear. After someone you love and trust perpetrates repeated and elaborate lies that reflect no empathy or awareness of the pain caused by these lies, your relationship with trust changes forever. While there is no clean slate, perhaps those marks that linger are teachers that may make us more circumspect and, suspicious in the future. A little suspicion can go a long way. And in our last takeaway for Abby, I asked and she asked, why do we do what we do? Abby was surprised as she went through her process and her research on lying that people are not that self-aware. Lack of self-awareness is a hallmark of narcissistic personalities. But it's not just antagonistic folks that lack self-awareness. Most of us could do with a deeper dive into ourselves. And when we do this, we become clearer not only on our own motivations, but also become more aware of how our words and our actions affect other people. Self-awareness connects us into our worlds more profoundly. And that not only connects us to other people, but it also allows us to keep our eyes more clear and wide open to what is happening around us, good, bad, or indifferent.